And today I'm going to be talking about psychology in chess. It's a mini series which is going to consist of 5 different topics, and the general question of psychology in chess is one that I think is slightly underrated and under-talked about. I think there's a lot to be said for doing extensive work on the psychological aspect of our beloved game. And today what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight some of the more salient areas which I think for tournament players, club players, professionals alike, really important to consider. And I hope that this series, even though it's very short and the videos are extremely brief, that we can gain some inspiration from this and think a bit more about the psychological side of our game. And the first chapter that I'm going to be discussing when it comes to psychology in chess is one of my favorite topics to discuss, and that is bluffing in chess. We often hear about it. Do chess players bluff? Can you bluff in chess? Is it just a poker term, or is it something that you can do in chess? Well, in my opinion, there are certain kinds of light bluffs that exist in chess. And what I'm going to do now in this video is talk about them, and where I think I've seen certain bluffs in certain situations in a game. And the first game we've got here is between none other than Fabiano Caruana, who won the Berlin Candidates tournament to play Magnus Carlsen later this year against Vladimir Kramnik. And the first element or first bluff question that I'd like to discuss, almost chronologically, is whether you can actually bluff very early in the game. And in this game between Caruana and Kramnik, this was from the Berlin Candidates tournament, the game started c4, e6, very normal, knight c3, d5, and d4. This is a position that Kramnik had been playing all tournament. And here he played the move pawn to c6, the triangle, and martial gambit of the Slav. And after c6, Fabiano played e4, which is the main line. D takes e4, knight takes e4. And in this position, we see already what can only be called a bluff by Vladimir Kramnik. He played a move that I think previously had only been played 3 or 4 times. And he played the move c5. Now, why is this a bluff? What is this move? Well, actually, in the post-mortem, Kramnik said this was a bluff. It's not a particularly good move, but it's a very unnerving move when, if you put yourself in Fabiano's shoes, he had been preparing for a Queen's Gambit declined or a semi-Tarrasch, as Kramnik had been playing all tournament. And then he's faced with a completely unknown novelty, which, when you look at the position, is not easy to refute over the board. And actually, the more you look at it, it's kind of unpleasant, because when White takes on c5, which is what Fabiano did, and Black plays knight c6, you can immediately see that this knight here on c5 is a bit loose. And if you play the move knight to b3 here, protecting this pawn, I'm sure Fabiano thought, well, maybe Black's just going to go a5 now, push a4 on the next move, and I'm White, and am I really going to get in trouble after 7 moves in the most important tournament of my life? So this bluff concept with c5, by the way, this doesn't work because the move a4 is actually extremely strong. So this is where the bluff is seen. This was a 1-game attempt by Kramnik just to completely unsettle Fabiano, who'd been studying for hours, preparing all the previous night with his second as well, and then he's facing something that he's never seen before, which is very tricky practically to analyze. So that's one concept, one idea of the bluff, and you can see this very early in the opening. And in fact, what happened in the game, if we breeze through it very quickly, is after knight f3, Black took on d4 and got a very fine game. So the bluff actually worked out to a certain extent in this one, and Fabiano was actually very lucky to make a draw in this game. So bluffs we can see in the opening, and in the next video what we're going to do is we're going to see bluffs when we're in a slightly hopeless position. So we join the game now between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, a fierce rivalry and one that has been very unfavorable for the American, who has got a terrible score against Magnus. Magnus was his voodoo opponent, couldn't beat him until very recently. And back in 2014 when they played, we got this position with Hikaru playing white, and white has got a completely winning position objectively. Black's king is extremely weak. White's pieces are all in the attack. White really only needs to deliver one fatal check, perhaps with a knight here on h6, and it's all over. But sometimes when we're in a losing position, we have to swindle our opponents or bluff our opponents. And Magnus Carlsen is an extremely resourceful player, not just a genius, but can be resourceful. And the psychological element of this game and the rivalry and the fact that Hikaru to this point was just getting beaten by Magnus on a regular basis means that Magnus didn't want to give up. He wanted to pose some practical problems and he wanted to swindle his opponent. And swindling is the ultimate form of the bluff, I would say, in chess. When you know you're completely lost, but you try and find a way to confuse your opponent and turn the tables. So in this position here, Nakamura plays the move queen to g4, which is okay. Magnus now played queen to b6. Nakamura came back to h3. Black came back to g6 with the queen. Basically saying to Hikaru, well, if you want to repeat, I'm obviously happy. You can go here, but you want to win here with white. And it's in this position where you could feel that Hikaru was getting very frustrated. He couldn't find a breakthrough. He knows there should be a breakthrough, but he couldn't find it. And, of course, if he goes here and black goes back, you know, he's in real danger of repeating the position. So Hikaru plays a move which looks like it should be good, pawn to d6. After all, if the queen is distracted away from the protection of this pawn here on h7, it's going to be mate. So after knight takes d6, which is what happened, knight takes d6, you know, Hikaru probably thought, well, Magnus is just going to resign very soon. But he completely missed the idea of rook to d8. And this was the swindle. And I imagine this is a terribly unpleasant move to face if you're Hikaru. Probably short on time as well. The point is now that if the knight moves to f5, back to f5, retaining the piece, then here black would be able to deliver a check down the back. And wherever the white king moves, he's going to get checked, and he's actually going to be mated here. This is going to be checkmate. And if the king moves to a2, once again, there's a nasty check that you have to deal with. And mate, I beg your pardon, not mate here, but this check. And once again, there's going to be mate at some point. So Hikaru basically, he probably couldn't believe his eyes. Rook d8. Am I being swindled here? And it's here where Hikaru had to find the only move, which is the move knight to c8. This is a very difficult move. In some aspects, put the knight on this back rank, but in other aspects, you come here. And I think the point is now that the queen is protecting the e6 square, so there's no queen e6 check. And the knight is protecting the b6 square, so there's no queen b6 check. And this position is completely winning. So Hikaru had to find that. He didn't. He played the move knight c4, and now black was able to take on e4. And suddenly, from nowhere, it's white's king that is more vulnerable than black's with the move rook d1 and queen d4 ideas. This knight is on pre as well. Black's going to gobble up this pawn. And Hikaru, in this position, understandably collapsed. He played the move queen h5, which is a terrible blunder. And now Magnus found the very strong move, rook to d3, which is a decisive counterattack. This rook now entering the game. If the knight moves, the rook takes the pawn. Hikaru tried rook h4, but black just stayed calm, protected his pawn on h7, queen f5, queen e2, and b5. And lo and behold, the knight has to move, and suddenly black can even take on g5. And here, with the rooks off, this pawn is going to fall. And from absolutely nowhere, the position will end up a loss for white. And an astonishing swindle there. Goes to show how important this is. So whenever we're in a lost position, if there are still dynamic possibilities, always try and find a way. Is there one last trick in the position? Because a swindle can save you half a point, or even sometimes it can net you the full one.